Radio Hoopoo presents Old Hollywood Intrigue with a look at vamp Barbara La Marr. In 1896, Barbara was born as Retha Dale Watson to William and Rosanna Watson in Yakima, Washington on the Yakima River. Her father was an editor for a newspaper, and her mother already had a son and a daughter, Violet, from a previous marriage. La Marr's home life was not exactly peaceful. Her father was known to move from town to town, work for various newspapers, blow them up, in her words, and then move to another town. He was a very creative man, but the home life wasn't exactly stable. As a child, La Marr knew that she wanted to perform, and she was performing as young as 8 years old in productions of Uncle Tom's Cabin in Tacoma. By 1910, La Marr was living in Fresno, California, and sometime after 1911, the family moved to Los Angeles, where the young girl worked in a department store. She would have been around 14, 15 years old at the time. Around this time, she was also appearing in burlesque shows, and she was sort of out of control. In January 1913, her half-sister Violet took Barbara on a 3-day automobile excursion with a man named C.C. Boxley. According to La Marr, Boxley tried to kidnap her, and her father went to the police, and warrants were issued for their arrest. La Marr testified against her sister Violet, but the case was eventually dropped. However, the judge commented that La Marr was too beautiful, a girl too beautiful to be out on her own, and so her nickname was born as the girl who was too beautiful. Barbara was a very dramatic young girl and would frequently run away from home, and her parents were very concerned about her, but I don't know where she got this streak from. I tend to think it's from her journalist father. It may have been from her mother, but eventually she ran away from home, and in 1914 she was supposedly in Yuma, Arizona, where she married a rancher named Jack Little in Mexico. And according to her, he had seen her riding in a car and followed her and kidnapped her and took her to Mexico to be married. And she was visiting one of his neighbors at a neighboring ranch when she received news that he had died. And so she was now the newly widowed wife of the rancher Jack Lytle. It's been difficult to find records of this, but Barbara did take the last name Lytle when she was a screenwriter and writer. She was known as Folly Lytle. And when she came back home to California after her supposed divorce, she asked to be called Beth, which was a childhood nickname. There's also a story that she was attacked and assaulted by 3 men, potentially the neighbors of Jack Lytle, after news came of his death. I'm not sure if that's the case, but it is true that she struggled with being named certain things throughout her life, and her name would change. La Marr couldn't wait to make her mark upon the world, and in 1914 she married Max Lawrence, who was actually named Lawrence Converse, and was a lawyer who was married with children. He also appeared to have mental issues, because when he was arrested for bigamy the day after they were married in 1914, he banged his head against the prison cell bars and died of a blood clot in his brain 3 days later. La Marr was very fond of dancing, and in 1914 she was featured by William Randolph Hearst, the San Francisco Examiner, for her dance routines, which were very popular. Her dance partners included Rudolph Valentino as Senor Rudolph and Clifton Webb. She danced across the country, including in New York City, Chicago, New Orleans, and at the 1915 World's Fair in San Francisco. La Marr once said she collected lovers like roses by the dozen, and she was soon married again in October 1916 to Philip Ainsworth, who was a dancer. Although he was set to inherit a lot of money from his parents, he was eventually incarcerated at San Quentin State Prison, seen here, for passing bad checks, and the couple divorced in 1917. It's interesting that La Marr, it seems like someone was looking out for La Marr. All of her husbands were looked into and had the law on them pretty regularly after they married, so I wonder if her father was keeping an eye on her. La Marr appears to have been working the vaudeville circuit somewhat because she married Ben Dealey, a vaudeville dancer and musical performer, in 1918. Dealey was over twice her age, an alcoholic, gambling addict, and a reported homosexual, and the couple separated in April 1921, but remained married on paper until 1923. La Marr was very creative and started writing about her life, and she turned these scenarios into studio shorts for Fox and United Artists while living in New York. She earned over 10 grand, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars in today's money, during her tenure. She was credited as writer Barbara La Marr Dealey on the films The Mother of His Children, The Rose of Nome, Flame of Youth, The Little Gray Mouse, and The Land of Jazz. Screenplays written by women were not uncommon in old Hollywood. Women writing as a profession was also not taboo and pretty common. Edith Wharton made it sort of common in the Gilded Age, and American women were able to capitalize on this. I actually think there were more female screenwriters in the 1920s than today in Hollywood. One day at United Artists, Barbara was noticed by silent film star Mary Pickford, and Pickford commented on her beauty and said that she should be in front of the camera and not behind it. There are variations of this story, that it was Mary Pickford's husband, Douglas Fairbanks, that noticed Barbara La Marr and gave her a role in the 1921 film The Three Musketeers. But Barbara was in and around films due to her screenwriting as early as 1920, so I'm not sure if Fairbanks was the one who really launched her career. Barbara La Marr's ability to dance and act was a huge boon to her, and she became friends with many old Hollywood dancers, including Zazu Pitts. La Marr, when she was on scene in films, was very active and creative and often lended her screenwriting ability to various films, which I will mention later. However, she did not sleep a lot. She remarked in an interview that she slept only 2 hours a night, and she supposedly struggled with her weight to the point that she embraced taking a pill that had a tapeworm in it. Clearly, the 2 hours of sleep did not work wonders for her metabolism. She also was fond of drinking, and while rumors swirled that she took cocaine and morphine, her close friends noticed that she didn't need to take any of those things because alcohol was her drug of choice. By 1922, La Marr starred in 2 films with Ramon Navarro, Trifling Women and The Prisoner of Zenda. She was also purportedly a lover of Ramon, which was unfortunate because Navarro was a homosexual and would die due to a homosexual tryst gone wrong years later. In these film stills and promotional material, it seems to me that La Marr is somewhat hiding a bump in her torso. I'm not sure, but it seems to me that she was pregnant during these films. In addition to acting in these movies, La Marr was writing screenplays for movies from 1920 to 1924, including The Hero, 1923, The Land of Jazz from 1920, My Husband's Wives, Sandra from 1924, The Shooting of Dan McGraw from 1924, and The White Moth. Barbara had a tumultuous personal life, and her name actually came from her dancing act with ballroom dancer Robert Carville, and she branded herself Barbara La Marr. She was capable of doing interpretive dances. She choreographed herself in addition to writing screenplays and acting in films, and her marriages were usually fraught with affairs. So it's very difficult to determine by whom she was pregnant in 1922. By 1923, Barbara was starring in the film Souls for Sale and actually hurt her ankle during a sequence and was prescribed morphine. Also in 1923, she married Jack Dougherty, who would be her fourth or fifth husband, depending on how you count her marriages. Jack Dougherty was a cowboy star and very skilled on horseback. When she married him, she wasn't completely divorced from Dealey, and Dealey was incredibly upset that La Marr's assets would be separated from him. And so Dealey's attorney put together a long list of men Barbara had presumably been with, including actors and staff and directors, and he tried to blackmail Barbara's manager with the release of this list. The district attorney got involved, and it was a huge mess. In classic Barbara living it to the fullest style, she purchased a Whitley Heights home which had just been built in 1923. The home featured stained glass, a built-in bathtub with taps made of gold, and a piano which supposedly had a little golden coffin full of cocaine or morphine on top of it. The house is and was very beautiful and features a 2-car garage as well as a separate office building which is connected to the house by a little bridge. Barbara loved this house and leased it out to complete movie work in New York in 1924. She never sold the house and kept it until her death. On July 29, 1922, Barbara would give birth to a healthy baby boy she named Marvin Carville La Marr. She faked his adoption from an orphanage in Texas, which was a trick that would be used by Hollywood for decades, but he was her biological son. It isn't known who the biological father of Marvin is or was. It's very interesting that he shares his middle name with Barbara's dance partner, Robert Carville, who she never married. It's also very interesting that if you mix up the letters in Ramon Gil Navarro, you can spell Marvin. Another potential option is Rudolph Valentino. He was someone that Barbara was involved with, and he was also one of her dance partners. William Haynes is another choice. However, he was a staunch homosexual and lived with his partner in their interior decorating business until his death. Poor Barbara. She said she's not silly enough to pretend to be an ingenue, but she just wanted to be a woman. This was incredibly hard for her. From her New York writing days, she knew Ernest Hemingway, so he's also a potential option for who the father of her child was. In photos, it's difficult to tell. I personally think Marvin looks a lot like Hemingway, but I think the Robert Carville story is also very apt. There has been no record that Jack Dougherty, her fourth and last husband, was the child's father, so I don't think that he was. By 1924, Barbara was still acting, but directors would have to stay with her on sets to ensure that she didn't get too drunk. One Hollywood fixer at the time was Paul Byrne, and Byrne was with Barbara in her last moments as she was dying from a combination of nephritis and tuberculosis. On January 30th, 1926, La Marr died of complications from the tuberculosis and nephritis at her parents' home in Altadena, California. She was 29. Rumors arose that film director Paul Byrne was the father of her child, but this was disproven, and he later went on to marry Jean Harlow. La Marr's home was seized by her creditors, and her funeral saw thousands of people walk by the coffin, with 5 people actually fainting in the audience from La Marr's death. Unfortunately, her last husband shot himself. It's believed due to financial woes, but this could have been due to personal issues over the baby as well. It's just not clear. Marvin was adopted by La Marr's friend Zazu Pitts and her husband, and he was renamed to Donald Michael. Don died in 2014, and there has been no revelation of who his father was, and so the mystery continues.